"This is what you deserve, you useless old woman. Now you're on your own." Those were the last words my son Ryan threw at me before speeding off in his car, leaving me stranded in front of an old house, with cracked walls and a roof about to collapse in the middle of the woods. I can still see the look of contempt on his face in the rearview mirror, as if I were a burden he had decided to dump far away from his life. 3 days later, that same son called me 45 times, desperate, shouting over the phone, "Mom, what did you do?" But it was already too late for any regret. My name is Linda Roberts. I'm 74 years old, and the story I'm about to tell shows how a child can sometimes be crueler than any stranger, and how life, in unexpected ways, ends up putting things in their place. I was born in a small farm town in the Midwest, into a humble and hardworking family. My father was a farmer, my mother a seamstress. From a young age, I learned that in this life, whatever little or much you get, you earn with sweat, effort, and above all, with dignity. I grew up surrounded by land, animals, and work tools. I learned to handle a plow before I learned to write well. There were no luxuries, but there were principles. My father always said, "A person's worth is in their word and in how they support their family." That lesson has stayed with me my whole life. I thank this channel for giving me the chance to open my heart and tell what happened to me. And to you who are listening right now, I ask a favor. If this story touches you, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment saying which city you're watching from. Real stories from people like you and me are told here every day, and who knows, maybe one day yours will be told too. Sometimes we keep too much inside, and we need to let it out so we don't burst. I spent 35 years of my life as a seamstress, working out of a small room in our house. My fingers were covered in scars from needle pricks. My eyes grew tired under the flickering yellow lamp, but every stitch I made was with my family in mind. My sewing machine became my only companion, its constant hum lulling me to sleep in the early hours as I finished prom dresses, school uniforms, and curtains for the neighbors. Everything to send every penny home and ensure my family never lacked anything. I'm not ashamed of that sacrifice. On the contrary, I was proud of every garment I helped create. I knew I was helping families celebrate milestones, connecting with my community. My life was tough, yes, but it had purpose. My husband, Charles, was the heart of our home. A man of strong character and, at the same time, infinite tenderness. He took care of the house and our 3 children, Ryan, Ethan, and Jessica. He never complained about my long hours. When I would finally emerge from my sewing room after working late into the night, he would greet me with a hug that erased all my fatigue and a kiss that reminded me it was all worth it. The children would run into my arms, and even though we were poor, I felt rich because I had a united family. At least, that's what I thought back then. From a young age, Ryan was different from his siblings. While Ethan and Jessica would run to me happily, he would watch me with a calculating gaze, as if he were measuring the worth of what I did. At just 12, he was already saying he didn't want to be a laborer's son, that he would study to become someone important. I thought it was good ambition, that he wanted to better himself, and as a mother, I felt a certain pride. But there was something in his tone, a way of speaking, that looked down on my calloused, needle-pricked hands. It was as if my effort meant nothing. When he turned 18, I got him a simple job at a local business as an office assistant. It was an honest opportunity, a start, but he never appreciated it. He complained all the time, saying it was undignified work for someone like him. In a few years, he got a degree in construction management and found a better job, and that's when the relationship between us truly began to change. I would finish my work, tired, my clothes smelling of machine oil, and he would greet me with a grimace of disgust. "Mom, couldn't you shower before sitting at the table?" he would say in front of his siblings and his father. That smell of old fabric is embarrassing. I would swallow my pride, stay silent, and go straight to the shower. Not because I was ashamed of my work, but because I didn't want my family to witness arguments. I thought, he's young, he'll mature, he'll understand the value of effort. But I was wrong. The years passed, and Ryan prospered. He started his own construction company, married a city girl, and had 2 beautiful children, Mason and Mia. Charles and I became doting grandparents, always present. Every weekend we would visit them, bring gifts, tell stories, and play in the yard. The kids adored us, hugging us with that pure affection only grandchildren can give. Those were my happiest moments. But for Ryan, that closeness was an annoyance. "Mom, you don't need to come every week. The kids have activities, they need their time," he would tell us. As if spending time with their grandparents was a waste of time. 5 years ago, I retired. I thought I would finally have time to enjoy my husband, take better care of him, be close to the grandkids. Our pension wasn't much, but it was enough to live peacefully in our little house on the farm. We had a vegetable garden, some chickens, even a few cows. A simple life, but ours. Everything seemed stable until Charles started feeling sick. Body aches, extreme fatigue, loss of appetite. I took him to a hospital in St. Louis, and we received the news that broke me in two. Pancreatic cancer, already advanced. My world fell apart. More than 45 years together, and suddenly they were telling me he had only a few months left to live. I took care of him day and night, taking him to chemotherapy, preparing the little food he could tolerate, giving him his medications on time. Ryan barely showed up, always busy with company matters. Ethan and Jessica, who lived far away, came when they could, but I was there every minute because I had made a promise, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. And that early morning, 3 days before our wedding anniversary, Charles left me. He passed away in my arms as I held his hand. I felt like half my life was ripped away in an instant. The funeral was on a rainy Thursday, with a fine drizzle like tears from the sky. Ryan arrived in a black suit, dark glasses, pretending to be the most grief-stricken. But I, watching him closely, knew that in his mind he was already calculating other things. And right there, in the midst of my grief, he would begin to show his true intentions. Ryan approached me after the funeral with a solemn air. He hugged me tightly, faking tears in his eyes, and whispered in my ear, "Mom, don't worry about anything. I'll take care of everything from now on." At first I thought he meant he would comfort me in my grief, be close as a son. But I soon understood that everything meant something very different. That same night, he took me to his house in the city. He sat me down in the living room, poured a coffee he didn't even touch, and said in a cold voice, "You're getting old, Mom. You can't stay alone on the farm. It's dangerous. You'd better come with me. You'll be safer here." I, still shattered by Charles's death, agreed without arguing. Maybe, deep down, I was naive enough to think that he was finally showing a bit of humanity. I left my house, my animals, my memories, and moved in with Ryan. But that decision would be the beginning of the bitterest chapter of my life. The first few days seemed calm. My grandchildren greeted me with hugs and asked me to tell them stories before bed. Mason wanted me to teach him how to plant beans in small pots, and Mia asked me to sing the songs Charles used to hum. I felt that my presence was good for them. However, Ryan and his wife didn't like it so much. I noticed their uncomfortable glances, their annoyed gestures when the kids ran to me. One afternoon, I heard his wife say in the kitchen, "Ryan, your mom is in the way. We don't have enough space, and the kids get too distracted by her." To which my son replied, not knowing I was listening from the hallway, "Relax, it's just a matter of time. I'll fix it." I didn't understand what he meant exactly, but those words stabbed me in the chest like a thorn. A few weeks passed and they started asking for my papers. Ryan said it was to organize my accounts and that I shouldn't worry. Tired, my mind still clouded by grief, I gave him copies of my ID, my pension documents, even the deeds to the house on the farm. He smiled with satisfaction and said, "Don't worry, Mom. I'm going to manage everything for your own good." I wanted to believe him. He was my son. I thought that despite his flaws, he must have some gratitude for the years I worked so he could study and get ahead. But it wasn't long before things became unbearable. It started with hurtful comments. "Mom, you can't take care of yourself anymore. It's better if I handle your money. Don't waste it on nonsense, old woman. I know where to invest." He treated me like I was useless, as if I no longer had a say in my own life, and the worst part was that he said it in front of my grandchildren. I saw how Mason and Mia looked at me, confused, as if they didn't understand why their dad spoke to me that way. Every day the situation got worse. I was forbidden from entering the kitchen. They said I made a mess. In the living room, I had to sit in an almost invisible corner so as not to be in the way. Sometimes I would spend hours looking out the window, remembering my time on the farm. The smell of damp earth, the crow of the roosters at dawn, memories that were the only thing keeping me going. One Sunday during lunch, Ryan raised his voice in front of everyone. "Mom, stop giving the kids weird ideas. We don't need them learning those country things. They should aspire to more." I remained silent, but inside I felt myself tearing apart. How could he say that? Had he forgotten that, thanks to that country, he had an education and opportunities? Little by little, I started noticing strange things. I would receive bank letters with notifications of large withdrawals I hadn't authorized. Ryan would snatch the mail from my hands, saying it was routine stuff. When I asked, he would answer curtly, "I know what I'm doing, Mom. Trust me." But that trust was breaking more each day. I began to feel that something very dark was being plotted behind my back. One night, I couldn't sleep. I heard a conversation in the living room. Ryan was on the phone. "Everything is already in my name. Soon, it will be all mine." A chill ran down my spine. I got up slowly and went back to my room. That was the first time I thought my own son was planning to strip me of everything I had built in my life. The next day, I decided to confront him. I found him in the dining room and said, "Ryan, explain to me what's happening with my accounts." He let out a mocking laugh. "Mom, you're in no condition to handle anything anymore. Everything you have is now in my hands, and it's for the best." "What do you mean, in your hands?" I asked, a lump in my throat. "Exactly. I own the house, the account, everything. You just worry about not getting sick anymore, because supporting you is already enough of a burden." I felt the floor open up beneath me. It wasn't just the contempt in his words. It was the confirmation that he no longer saw me as his mother, but as a burden. From that moment on, life in his house became a living hell. They would hide food from me, yell at me, and relegate me as if I were an old piece of furniture. I tried to stay calm for my grandchildren, but every day it became more evident that Ryan wanted to get rid of me. And one Friday morning, as we were having breakfast, he made it clear. "Mom, you can't stay here anymore. I found a place where you'll be better off. I'll take you tomorrow." "What place?" I asked, afraid. "A house in the outskirts. You won't bother anyone there." I knew in that instant he planned to abandon me. That night I couldn't close my eyes. I wondered over and over how a son could go so far. I remembered Charles, his tenderness, his smile, and I felt he was giving me strength from wherever he was. I promised myself I wouldn't be humiliated anymore. I had to do something. At dawn, Ryan arrived with the car running. He took my arm and said in a dry voice, "Let's go, Mom. It's time." And it was there, at that very moment, that the darkest part of this story began, the part that would mark me forever. Ryan drove without saying a single word. I was in the passenger seat, watching out the window as the city faded behind us, and slowly the landscape became more barren. The silence was so thick you could hear the car's engine like an uncomfortable heartbeat. I tried to speak to understand where he was taking me. "Ryan, where are we going?" "You'll see, Mom. It's a quiet place. You won't lack for anything there," he replied without looking at me. The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't the voice of a concerned son. It was the voice of someone who just wanted to get rid of a weight. The drive lasted almost 2 hours. Finally, he stopped in front of a dilapidated house with peeling paint, a rusty gate, and a smell of dampness you could feel even from outside. Ryan got out first, opened my door, and gave me a sharp gesture to get out. I hesitated. "Here? Are you really going to leave me here?" "Yes, Mom. You'll be better off here. No one will bother you, and I can focus on my life." He said it with a coldness that cut through me like a knife. He took a small suitcase with my clothes, put it on the ground, and without another word, got back in the car. Before driving off, he added, "Don't look for me, don't call me. Just accept that this is your place now." And he left, kicking up dust on the road while I stood there, heartbroken. I went into the house and found damp walls, broken windows, and a frightening silence. There was no furniture, just an old mattress thrown on the floor. It was as if he had abandoned me in a living tomb. The first few days were terrible. I had almost no food. I walked to a small nearby village to buy tortillas and beans with the few coins I had left. I slept little because every noise in that house made me think the roof would collapse. The early morning cold chilled me to the bone, and more than once I thought I would die there without anyone knowing. But it wasn't all silence. Inside me, a mix of pain and anger began to grow. Pain because my own son had treated me like trash, anger because I understood I had allowed it for too long. As I remembered the humiliations, his hurtful words, the papers I had given him in trust, I felt something ignite within me. One morning, while trying to light a small stove to heat coffee, I looked at my hands, those tough, scarred hands that had worked a lifetime. I wondered, how is it possible that I'm now treated like I'm useless? And it was in that moment that I knew I couldn't give up. The days passed slowly, but in my mind, a plan began to form. I had to get back what was mine. I had to show Ryan that I was still a mother with dignity. I started walking to the village more often. There I found kind people, farmers and workers who offered me food, who asked where I came from. I never told them the whole truth, but in those chats I regained some hope. One afternoon I ran into an old acquaintance from my workdays, Mr. Henderson, who now lived in the area. He was surprised to see me and said, "Linda, what are you doing here? I thought you were living on the farm." I looked down and replied, "Ah, Charles is no longer with us, and my son decided this was my place." He was silent for a moment, then put his hand on my shoulder. "You don't deserve this. If you need help, count on me." Those words gave me strength. I wasn't as alone as I thought. Meanwhile, Ryan didn't call. Not a single visit, not a message. It was as if he had erased me from his life. But I knew that sooner or later, the consequences of his actions would come. Life has mysterious ways of putting everyone in their place. One night, lying on that old mattress, I heard the distant crow of a rooster and remembered my farm, Charles, my young children. A tear ran down my cheek, but instead of sinking, I told myself, I'm going to get up. I will not let my story end here, forgotten like a dog. The next day, with a determination I hadn't felt in years, I got up early and walked to the village with a single purpose, to start making my moves. I didn't know exactly how I would do it, but I was convinced this would not be my grave. And what I never imagined was that while I was starting to regain my strength, Ryan would begin to face a problem that would bring him to his knees and lead him back to me. The days in that abandoned house felt endless, but slowly I found a way to survive. I walked to the village every morning, bought essentials, and chatted with people who over time began to treat me as one of their own. Some offered me light work, feeding chickens, fixing a fence, clearing a piece of land. I did it gladly, because it not only gave me enough to eat, but it also reminded me that I was still useful, that my hands were still good for more than just holding memories. On those walks, I started hearing rumors about Ryan. They said his company, the construction firm he had built with such pride, wasn't doing as well as he claimed, that he owed money to suppliers, that he had invested in inflated land deals, and was up to his neck in debt. I listened in silence, my heart torn between sadness and the justice that was beginning to emerge. The same son who had stripped me of everything and abandoned me in misery was now starting to taste a bit of that bitterness himself. One afternoon, while I was fixing a pen for a neighbor, Mr. Henderson arrived with a serious look on his face. He came over and said, "Linda, I was in the city yesterday, and I heard your son is in big trouble. Apparently, the banks won't lend him any more money." I nodded slowly, trying to stay calm. Life settles its accounts, Henderson, and sometimes it does it faster than we think. That night I couldn't sleep. I imagined Ryan desperate, looking for a way out, just as I had seen him years ago, but in different circumstances. The difference was that when I was lost, I always tried to give my family the best. He, on the other hand, had left me as if I were a burden. Days passed, and one Thursday afternoon, while I was at the village market, my old cell phone started to ring. Ryan's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated to answer, but something inside me told me I had to. "Hello?" I said, my voice firm. On the other end, I heard a choked sob. "Mom, I need to talk to you." They were the first words he had spoken to me in months. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "Things have gotten complicated. The company is about to go bankrupt. Creditors are pressuring me and I don't know what to do. You always knew how to solve problems. Help me." I was speechless. I wanted to scream in his face all the pain he had caused me. I wanted to remind him that just a few weeks ago he had left me in a ruined house, without food or company. But I didn't. I just took a deep breath and replied, "Ryan, you stopped listening to me a long time ago. You said I was useless, that my calloused hands were good for nothing. And now you come asking for my help?" He was silent for a few seconds and then mumbled, "I know. I was wrong. But I need you to support me, Mom." I hung up without giving him an answer. That call stirred everything up inside me. I didn't know whether to feel compassion or rage. What I did know was that for the first time in a long time, Ryan was looking for me. And not the other way around. The next day he called again, and the day after that too. In less than a week, I had registered more than 40 missed calls on my phone. With every ring, my heart fluttered. But I decided not to answer anymore. If he wanted to see me, he would have to do it face to face, and so he did. One Saturday morning, I heard a car approaching the abandoned house. I looked out the window and saw Ryan get out, his face haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and his suit wrinkled. He approached slowly, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Mom?" he said as soon as we made eye contact. "Forgive me. I didn't know what I was doing." I watched him in silence, letting each word fall like drops in the desert. "You took my house, my money, my peace of mind. You left me here as if I were a dog. And now you come asking for forgiveness because you're in trouble." He lowered his head, unable to meet my gaze. "It's true I was ungrateful, arrogant, but if you don't help me, I'll lose everything." For the first time, I felt the scales of life had tipped. He, who had seen me as a burden, now depended on me. It was a moment I never would have imagined, but there it was, right before my eyes. Ryan tried to approach me for a hug, but I took a step back. "It's not that easy, son. The wounds you left don't heal with a few words." He knelt, crying like a child. "I'm begging you, Mom. Tell me what to do. Teach me, like when I was little." That moment tore me apart inside. Seeing my son humiliated, asking for help, reminded me of the boy who once dreamed of being someone great, but who lost his way. I didn't answer immediately. I left him there, kneeling, while a battle raged inside me between resentment and the mother's love that, despite everything, was still alive. And although I didn't know it yet, that decision would mark not only my destiny, but his as well. Ryan remained on his knees before me, his hands trembling and his eyes swollen from crying. I had never seen him like this, so vulnerable, so defeated. For a moment, the image of that haughty, arrogant young man who had left me in the middle of the woods seemed like a distant memory. Before me was a broken man, pleading like someone begging for air to keep breathing. I, however, did not move a finger to lift him up. I looked at him intently and felt a mixture of compassion and distrust. Deep down, I knew that Ryan had always been skilled at faking, at manipulating for his own convenience. Were those tears sincere or just part of another one of his performances? "Get up, Ryan," I said in a hard but calm voice. "A Roberts doesn't grovel before anyone, not even their own mother." He obeyed, though still with his head bowed. "Mom, I thought I could do it alone. I thought I was smarter than everyone. But now I realize I was wrong. You were always stronger than me." He paused, took a deep breath, and continued, "I just want a chance to fix things." My lips almost moved to tell him what he wanted to hear, but I held back. I remembered that early morning when I overheard his phone conversation, when he was planning to abandon me in this ruin as if I were trash. I remembered his fake laugh, his cold words. "This way you'll have your independence, away from the city." How could I forget something like that? "Ryan," I replied, "when you left me here, you said it was what I deserved. Have you already forgotten?" He flinched, as if those words were a knife piercing his chest. "No, I haven't forgotten, and I regret it every day." We stood in silence for a long time. The wind blew through the cracks in the house, and the creak of a loose tile seemed to punctuate every second. Finally, I pointed to a broken chair in the corner. "Sit down. Let's talk like adults." Ryan obeyed. His breathing was ragged, as if he feared I would throw him out again at any moment. I watched him, trying to read his face. Then I asked him directly, "What do you really want from me?" He looked me in the eyes for the first time in a long time. Advice, guidance. You always knew how to get back up after every fall. I don't. "I'm lost, Mom." His words sounded sincere, but my heart resisted believing them completely. I decided not to give him an immediate answer. I stood up and walked to the door, gazing at the barren horizon. I remembered my father's teachings. Whoever controls the water, controls life. And just behind that forgotten house was the crystal-clear spring that Ryan had no idea existed. "Life gives us tests, son," I said without turning my head. "And sometimes those tests are the only way to learn what respect means." Ryan stood up too, took a few steps closer, and said in a broken voice, "I'm willing to start from scratch, Mom." To work, to listen, to obey if necessary. Just don't leave me alone in this. I saw him and thought of Charles, of how much he would have wanted to see his son repentant. Maybe he would have told me to forgive him without a second thought. But I wasn't Charles. His betrayals had marked me too deeply. "We'll see, Ryan." I gestured with my hand. "For now, go. I need time to think." And he nodded, head down, and left the house. I heard his car's engine fade away as a whirlwind of mixed feelings raged inside me. I didn't know if I was witnessing true repentance or the beginning of another one of his schemes to take advantage. That night I barely slept. I tossed and turned on the cot, replaying his pleas over and over in my head. My thoughts mingled with the echo of Charles's words in his final days. "Take care of your children, Linda, even if it hurts, because in the end, they are still your blood." Was that what I was supposed to do? Take care of him even after everything he did to me? At dawn, I walked out to the spring. The crystal-clear water ran with pure, abundant force. I bent down to drink some and felt its freshness clear my mind. There, in front of that hidden treasure, I understood that my destiny was changing and that I held an opportunity in my hands that Ryan had never imagined. When I returned, I found an envelope under the door. It was a letter written by him. In a trembling hand, it said, "Mom, I know I hurt you more than I can ever repair, but if there is still a spark of love in your heart, I beg you to let me show you that I can change. Only you can teach me to be a better person. Don't abandon me as I abandoned you." I clutched the letter tightly. It was hard not to be moved, but I also knew I couldn't let myself be swayed by emotion alone. The damage was done, and trusting again wasn't going to be so easy. I put the letter in my pocket and looked around. The house didn't seem so dilapidated anymore. Every day I spent there, I became more convinced that this place held the justice that life had in store for me. And maybe, just maybe, it also held a second chance, though I still didn't know if it was for Ryan or just for me. The days following Ryan's visit were a whirlwind in my mind. I knew the letter he left under the door by heart. I read it so many times that every word seemed to haunt me. There was a tone of pleading in it that I had never heard from him before, but doubt still lingered. Was it genuine repentance or just a desperate strategy to win my trust? Meanwhile, I couldn't put my life on hold for his problems. The spring behind the house became my priority. I spent my mornings clearing the land, putting up fences, and planting some vegetables that people from the village had given me. Every strike of the hoe, every seed planted, reminded me that I still had the strength to create something of my own. I felt that this place, which to Ryan was nothing more than a dump, could become my refuge and my victory. One afternoon, I had an unexpected visit from Mrs. Gable, a neighbor from the village. She came with a basket of freshly baked bread and tortillas. "Mrs. Roberts, I heard you've been fixing up the property," she said with a smile. "If you need help with tools or seeds, just let me know. People around here appreciate hard work." I was deeply grateful for that solidarity. Little by little, the abandonment and loneliness were beginning to transform into companionship and hope. I realized that even though Ryan had left me to my fate, I wasn't really alone. There were good people who understood what respect was. Weeks passed, and my work bore fruit. The garden began to turn green. The chickens I bought with a little savings laid fresh eggs. And the house, though humble, no longer looked like a ruin. In those days, Mr. Davis, a lawyer introduced to me by an acquaintance from the village, also came into my life. He explained that the land wasn't properly registered, and that if I could prove peaceful occupation and improvements to the property, I could file for adverse possession. "Mrs. Roberts," the lawyer said as he reviewed some papers, "you have a golden opportunity here. If you can prove possession and consistent work, this land can be legally yours." "And what if my son tries to claim it?" I asked cautiously. "Your son has nothing in writing. What he did was occupy it and then abandon it. Legally, he has no grounds for a claim." His words lit a spark in my heart. Justice, finally, could be on my side. However, not all the news was good. Ryan was persistent. In less than 2 weeks, he had called more than 40 times. His messages went from pleading to reproach, from tears to veiled threats. "Mom, answer me. I need to talk to you. Mom, if you don't help me, I'm going to lose everything. Mom, you can't do this to me. I'm your son." I listened to some of those messages with a mixture of sadness and firmness. Yes, he was my son, but he was also the same man who had humiliated me and thrown me away like trash. Until one day he showed up at the house again, this time in a white truck and accompanied by two men who were clearly not friends. He got out with a confident stride, trying to appear secure, but his eyes betrayed him. He was desperate. "Mom," he said as soon as he stood in front of me, "we have to resolve this today. I don't want fights or embarrassments. Sign these papers, and we'll be even." He held up a folder with pages full of stamps and questionable signatures. "I didn't even touch them." "What papers are these?" I asked calmly. "It's an agreement. You give me half the property, and we both win." I laughed bitterly. "Ryan, half the property of what? You left me here yourself, saying it was a dump. Now it turns out it's worth so much you want to split it?" The two men with him took a step forward as if to impose respect. I didn't move. I locked my gaze on Ryan and added, "If you think I'm going to sign anything under threat, you're very mistaken. I'm 74 years old, son, and I've dealt with more dangerous men than these two on job sites. Do you really think I'm going to be intimidated now?" Ryan raised his hand, stopping his companions. He looked uncomfortable. Maybe he hadn't told them they were coming to pressure an old woman. They seemed to hesitate themselves. One muttered, "I don't like this, boss. I didn't come here to intimidate old ladies." The other nodded, and without another word, they turned around and got back in the vehicle. Ryan was left alone with the folder in his hand and his dignity in tatters. "Mom, you don't understand. This is good for both of us." His voice trembled between pleading and rage. "No, Ryan, it's good for you. The only thing that's good for me is to live in peace." He put his hands on his head and shouted in desperation, "You can't do this to me. I'm your son. I have a right." I approached him slowly, looked him in the face, and replied, "The day you left me here, you gave up that right." Ryan was speechless. For the first time, I saw him at a loss for words, as if he had understood the true weight of his actions. He turned around, walked to the truck, and before getting in, threw one last phrase filled with impotence. "This isn't over." The engine roared, and the vehicle disappeared, kicking up a cloud of dust. I stood at the entrance of the house, my heart racing, but firmer than ever. It wasn't me who should be afraid. It was him. Life was giving him back every bit of scorn, every humiliation, and he still didn't know what was coming, because the best was yet to come. I sat on the wooden chair I had repaired days before, looked at the horizon, and thought of Charles. He was surely smiling from heaven, seeing how, little by little, justice was falling into place. The spring continued to flow, clear and generous, a symbol that even in the midst of abandonment, new life could be born. That night I slept peacefully, for the first time in a long time. But at dawn the next day, I heard the insistent ringing of my cell phone, and seeing the screen, I understood that Ryan hadn't given up yet. The phone didn't stop ringing all morning. It was Ryan, over and over again, insisting. I let the first call go, the second one too. By the third, I knew he wasn't going to give up easily. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, as I had done so many times in the past, but unlike before, now I didn't feel sadness, but a strange calm. It was as if each ring was a reminder that life had rearranged the pieces on the board. When I finally answered, I heard his broken voice. "Mom, thank God you answered. I need to talk to you." I was silent for a few seconds before responding. "There's nothing left to talk about, Ryan. Everything was made clear that day." "No, Mom. Listen to me. You don't understand. The company is sinking, and if we don't resolve something soon, I'm going to lose everything." Those words made me smile bitterly. "Resolve?" he said, as if I had been sitting comfortably watching his misfortune, when in reality he had dug his own hole. "Ryan, I have nothing to do with your business," I said firmly. "You chose your path, and now you have to face it." On the other end, I only heard ragged breaths until he finally exploded. "But I'm your son. You have an obligation to help me." That shout ignited my blood. For a moment I was about to hang up, but I stopped myself. A mother's obligation is to raise her children, teach them what's right, and give them the tools for life. I already did that with you. What you do with what I taught you, that's your responsibility now. Ryan fell silent. I could hear a muffled sob, but I felt no pity. Rather, a kind of justice that was finally settling in. The following days were a parade of calls and messages, some pleading, others with disguised threats. "Mom, please. Mom, if you don't help me, I'll be ruined. Mom, don't make me do something I don't want to do." I listened to all of them, but I didn't respond. It was my turn to be silent, just as he had been when he abandoned me. Meanwhile, my life on the property continued to take shape. Mr. Davis, the lawyer, visited me frequently to check on the progress of the adverse possession claim. Each time he brought better news, the paperwork was moving forward, the documentation was lining up. Everything indicated that the property would soon be in my name. Mrs. Roberts, he said one afternoon while reviewing some files, it's most likely that in a few weeks the judge will give the final ruling. And believe me, there's no way to lose this. You have all the proof of possession and improvements. I felt a relief I don't remember feeling in years. That land, which to Ryan was just a piece of trash, had become my hope for life. And best of all, he could do nothing to stop it. It was during those days that Dr. Evans, a water expert, came on the scene, accompanied by the lawyer. He analyzed the spring with instruments I had never seen before, and after a couple of hours of taking samples and notes, he gave me the news that would change my destiny. Mrs. Roberts, he said seriously, but with a glint in his eye, this water is of the highest quality I have seen in a long time, pure, with a perfect pH, and a surprising abundance. We are talking about a flow that easily exceeds 10,000 liters per hour. I was speechless. I didn't fully grasp what that meant, but the lawyer clarified it for me as soon as the doctor left. Do you realize, Mrs. Roberts, he said, entire companies would pay millions for the rights to exploit a spring like this. You are sitting on a treasure. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. I remembered the scene of Ryan leaving me in the middle of the woods, telling me it was what I deserved. And now life was showing me that what I really deserved was much more than he ever imagined. The days flew by, and as expected, Ryan found out. I don't know how, but a rumor reached the city, and he sniffed it out immediately. His calls, which were once pleading, became frantic. One afternoon, he even shouted at me over the phone. "Mom, you can't do this to me. That property is mine." I answered calmly. "No, Ryan, that property was never yours. And now, less than ever." Silence, just a few gasps of impotence. In the village, it was already being whispered that something big was about to happen. The lawyer had contacted a company interested in the spring, and the initial offers exceeded all expectations. I, who had been thrown away like a burden, was about to become a wealthy woman. But it wasn't the money that moved me. What really filled me was justice, seeing how fate took a turn and put everything in its place. Ryan, the arrogant son, was desperate, and I, the useless old woman in his words, was now the one holding the future in her hands. In the early morning of the third day of negotiations, the cell phone rang again. I looked at the screen and, as expected, it was him. I hesitated for a second before answering, and when I did, I heard what I never would have imagined coming out of his mouth. "Mom, if you don't share what you get from that water, I'm going to end up on the street." I was stunned. Finally, Ryan had taken off his mask. He was no longer talking about love or family or forgiveness. Now it was only money that moved him. "So that's why you were calling?" I replied dryly. "Not out of regret, not out of affection, just for money." He tried to interrupt, but I silenced him. "You'll have your answer tomorrow, Ryan, but it won't be the one you're expecting." I hung up. Outside, the spring continued to flow in silence, as if the earth itself wanted to remind me that justice, though it may be late, always arrives. The next day I woke up earlier than usual. The crowing of the roosters still echoed in the air, and the fog covered part of the land. I washed my face in the spring, that cool water that seemed to remind me at every moment that life was giving back what Ryan had taken from me. As I took a sip, I thought about the words I had said to him the night before. "You'll have your answer tomorrow." That moment had arrived today. It wasn't long before I heard an engine approaching. Ryan appeared in the same white truck, but this time he was alone. He got out of the vehicle with his head down, with dark circles under his eyes and wrinkled clothes. It looked like he hadn't slept all night. "Mom," he said in a hoarse voice, "I've come to hear your decision." I sat on the wooden chair in front of the house, looked at him, and answered calmly. "Ryan, last night I understood something very clearly. All your calls, your letters, your tears, were not for me or for your father, much less for your family. They were for money." He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand and interrupted him. "Let me finish. I didn't work my whole life. I didn't lose your father. I didn't go hungry and lonely so that you could now take advantage of what I found here." Ryan took a step forward, his face contorted. "But I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything?" "Of course it means something," I replied. "You are my son, and that's why I don't wish you harm. But being a son doesn't give you the right to destroy your mother and then come back only when you need something." There was a heavy silence between us. The wind moved the branches of the trees and the water of the spring. It ran without stopping, as if reminding us that time continued its course without waiting for anyone. Ryan put his hands on his head and began to cry. "Mom, if you close the door on me, I'll have nowhere to go. I'm going to lose everything." I stood up and approached him. For the first time in a long time, I looked him in the eyes with serenity. "Ryan, sometimes losing everything is the only way to learn the value of what you have." He froze. He didn't expect to hear those words. He lowered his arms and suddenly hugged me, like when he was a child and would run to me after a fall. His body trembled, and for a second I thought of Charles. Maybe he would have asked me to forgive him. Maybe that was his way of telling me, from wherever he was, that there was still a spark of hope. But I couldn't forget. "Ryan," I said as I gently pushed him away, "don't confuse forgiveness with forgetting. I can forgive you in my heart, but I won't forget what you did to me. And I certainly won't give you what you didn't know how to value." He nodded slowly, wiping his tears. He seemed resigned. He got back into the truck, and before starting it, he said, "Someday, you'll understand that I just wanted a chance." He drove off, kicking up dust on the road, and I stood watching until he disappeared. I didn't feel joy or revenge. I felt peace, because for the first time, I had set clear boundaries. The following days were full of activity. The lawyer, Mr. Davis, confirmed that the judge's ruling was almost ready. The property would legally be in my name in a matter of weeks. In addition, representatives from a company interested in the spring arrived. They wanted to make a formal contract to bottle and distribute the water. When they mentioned the figures, I had a hard time believing it. They were talking about millions of dollars, of monthly royalties, that would guarantee a dignified, even luxurious, old age. That night, I sat at the table with a piece of paper and a pencil. I started doing the math, imagining a future I never thought possible. A decent house, education for my grandchildren, support for Ethan and Jessica, who had always stayed close. Everything was possible thanks to the same land where Ryan had abandoned me. However, not everything was resolved. Rumors were reaching the village that Ryan was more desperate than ever. Some said he had borrowed money from dangerous loan sharks. Others, that he had tried to sell land that didn't belong to him. What was certain was that his downfall was becoming more and more evident. One afternoon, while I was reviewing some documents with the lawyer, Ryan showed up again. This time he didn't come with shouts or threats. He arrived walking with slumped shoulders and a lost look. He seemed to have aged suddenly. "Mom," he said in a dull voice, "I didn't come for money. I just wanted to see you again." That sentence puzzled me. I invited him to sit on the wooden bench next to the garden. We spent several minutes in silence looking at the horizon. Finally, he spoke. "When I was a kid and you would come home from work, I always saw you tired, with grease on your hands. And instead of feeling proud, I felt ashamed. Now I realize how foolish I was. Those hands were the ones that fed me, that gave me a roof over my head, that made sure I never lacked for anything." His words touched me deeply. I didn't know if I fully believed him, but they sounded more sincere than ever. "Ryan," I replied, "if you truly understood that, then you've already gained more than I could ever give you with money." He nodded, and for a moment he was that boy again who once looked at me with admiration. When he left that afternoon, I was left thinking about what he had said. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope that he could change. But the truth was that his problems were not over, and soon we would both have to face a situation that would test whether that repentance was real or just an illusion. The days after Ryan's visit left me unsettled. His words echoed in my head. Those hands were the ones that fed me. For the first time in a long time, I had seen him acknowledge what I always knew, that my effort had not been in vain. But at the same time, I knew my son well. I knew he could be sincere one day, and the next be swept away by arrogance or desperation. Meanwhile, my life moved forward. The lawyer confirmed that the judge's ruling was on its way, and that, as soon as it was issued, the property and the spring would officially be in my name. It was a matter of days. I tried not to get my hopes up too much, but every time I saw the water gushing with that inexhaustible force, I felt that fate was on my side. The whole town started talking about it. Some congratulated me. When I went to the market, others offered me help to work the land. I had never felt so valued. It was as if all the sacrifice of my life was finally being recognized. However, I also knew that news traveled fast, and that Ryan wouldn't stay quiet. I confirmed it one afternoon. He arrived unexpectedly, this time without a fancy truck or a suit. He came walking, in simple clothes and with a tired face. Seeing him, I didn't feel anger, but a strange mixture of compassion and caution. "Mom," he said as he stopped in front of the house, "I need to ask you a favor." I invited him in. He sat on the same wooden chair where he had so many times tried to justify himself. "I don't want money. I don't want papers," he began. "I just want you to let me stay here for a while. I swear I won't cause any trouble. I'm lost." I looked at him in silence. I remembered the first time he left me in front of those destroyed walls, the way he sped off in his car without looking back. It was hard to forget that wound. "Ryan, do you know what you're asking me?" I replied. "This house, this land, this place was where you abandoned me, and now you want to stay here with me." He lowered his head. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I have nowhere else to go." I didn't answer immediately. A struggle was raging inside me, the mother who still loved him against the wounded woman who couldn't forget. "Finally," I said, "you can stay for a few days, but on one condition. No lies, no tricks here. If you've really come to change, you'll have to prove it with actions." Ryan was relieved. During that week, I saw him get up early, help me clear the land, carry buckets of water, repair fences. He wasn't the same arrogant man who looked down on me. He seemed like a defeated person seeking redemption. One night, as we were eating beans and tortillas, he confessed what he had never said before. "Mom, I always wanted to be more than you. Not because I looked down on you, although it seemed that way. It was because I was afraid of becoming someone forgotten, someone who worked hard their whole life and had nothing in the end. And in that ambition, I became what I swore I would never be, an empty man." Those words pierced me. Maybe it was the first time I understood where so much contempt came from. It didn't justify it, but at least it showed me a human side he hadn't wanted to show before. "Ryan," I said, "what you never understood is that it doesn't matter how much money you have or how many degrees you hang on the wall. In the end, the only thing that matters is the dignity with which you live. That's what I always tried to teach you." He remained silent, his eyes moist. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about whether I should give him another chance, but at dawn, I received the call from Mr. Davis. "Mrs. Roberts," he said excitedly, "congratulations. The judge signed the ruling. The property and the spring are officially yours." I was speechless. I didn't know what to say. It was confirmation that everything I had been through had been worth it. Justice, at last, was on my side. Ryan was with me when I received the news. I saw him clench his fists, as if trying to contain an emotion he didn't know if it was joy or envy. Finally, he hugged me and murmured, "Congratulations, Mom. You deserve it." I wanted to believe him, but something in his eyes made me doubt. It wasn't the first time Ryan had pretended one thing and thought another deep down. That same night, as I was sleeping, I heard strange noises outside the house. I got up quietly and, through the window, I saw a silhouette moving near the spring. I grabbed a wooden stick and went out slowly. There was Ryan, kneeling by the water, with his cell phone in his hand, taking photos and videos. "What are you doing, Ryan?" I asked in a grave voice. He startled, put the phone in his pocket, and stammered, "Nothing, Mom. I was just looking at the water." I confronted him firmly. "Don't lie to me. Were you recording? For whom?" He didn't answer. He lowered his head and stood motionless. It was in that moment that I understood that, no matter the tears and speeches, Ryan was still the same as always, someone incapable of letting go of ambition. I looked at him for a long time and just said, "If you plan to betray me again, this will be the last chance you'll have to get close to me." He didn't respond. He went back to the house in silence, and I stayed watching the water run, wondering if I had done the right thing by letting him back into my life. What I didn't know at that moment was that those recordings would unleash the most critical moment of our story, and that everything I had endured until then would be put to the test in the harshest way. That night, I barely slept. I sat by the spring, listening to the running water and thinking about what I had seen. Ryan secretly taking photos and videos. It wasn't the first time he had said one thing and done another, and inside me, something broke for good. I understood that even if he apologized 1,000 times, even if he cried in front of me, he would never stop being the same ambitious man who had abandoned me as if I were a burden. At dawn, I found him in the kitchen heating coffee. He didn't greet me like on other days. I watched him in silence, and finally said, "Ryan, if you really want to change, this is not the way. Deceiving your mother again only proves that you've learned nothing." He tried to justify himself. "Mom, it's not what you think. I just wanted to have proof of what this water is worth, so you would understand." I laughed bitterly. "You think I need proof? I live here every day. I know perfectly well what I have. You didn't discover it." The silence was brutal. Ryan looked down and understood that I had found him out. In that moment, I knew I couldn't continue sharing a roof with him. "I gave you a chance," I continued, "but you wasted it. Don't come near this house again, Ryan. Don't come near me again." He opened his mouth to protest, but the tone of my voice stopped him. He gathered his things in silence and left without saying goodbye. I watched him walk away down the dirt road until he disappeared on the horizon. And inside, though hurt, I felt peace. I knew that was the last time I would let him into my life. Days later, Mr. Davis gave me the official papers. The property was legally in my name, with all rights to the spring. We signed a contract with the water distribution company, and suddenly I went from being an abandoned old woman in a shell of a house to a woman with enough resources to live peacefully for the rest of my days. It wasn't about luxury or revenge. It was about justice. The same justice that allowed me to get up after being humiliated by my own son. With that money, I was able to remodel the house, turn it into a dignified and cozy place. I put a plaque at the entrance with Charles's name, because everything I did, and everything I achieved, was also for him. My other children, Ethan and Jessica, came to visit me with their families. They cried with emotion seeing how that old piece of land had been transformed into a small paradise. The grandchildren played in the garden. They ran among the chickens and laughed at the freshness of the water. In those moments, I felt that despite all the pain, life had rewarded me with a new beginning. Ryan, on the other hand, never came back. I heard rumors that he had lost the company, that he owed money, and that he had moved far away, trying to start over. I don't know if he will ever manage to change. All I know is that I could no longer carry his mistakes. Everyone must face the consequences of their actions, and he had chosen his path. Now, every morning I get up early, walk to the spring, and sit and listen to the water. I close my eyes and feel that Charles is with me, smiling, telling me that it was all worth it. Sometimes I think of Ryan, and it hurts, because a mother never stops loving her son. But I also understand that loving doesn't mean letting them destroy you. And that was the hardest lesson I had to learn in my old age. Today, I can say with my heart in my hand that I am not a useless old woman. I am a woman who worked her whole life with dignity, who faced the betrayal of her own son, and who still found the strength to get back up. Life took a lot from me, but it also gave me back in spades what I deserved. And to you, who are listening to me at this moment, I want to ask something. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Leave a comment telling us which city you're joining us from, and tell me if you've ever experienced a similar betrayal. This space is for sharing, for remembering that we are never alone, that there will always be someone who understands our pain. Because in the end, life comes full circle, and even when it seems like all is lost, the day always comes when justice knocks on the door. I am Linda Roberts, and this was my story.